In a world of crowns and winter, one choice changes everything. What if one marriage rewrote the fate of Westeros? Let's begin today's story. This story is written and narrated by Fantasy Reimagined.
Chapter 1 The North Remembers. The Hall of Winterfell had never felt so large. Robb Stark stood beneath the banners of his ancestors, the dire wolf of House Stark hanging heavy above him, its gray eyes seeming to watch and judge. The stone walls that once echoed with his father's calm authority now carried sharper voices, older voices, louder voices, men who had followed Ned Stark into war and peace alike, and did not know how to follow a boy in his place. "He took our lord," Great John Umber thundered, his fist striking the table hard enough to rattle cups. "They chained him like a common thief. Words won't bring him home. Swords will." Across the table, Lord Glover shook his head. "Swords cut both ways. We don't know what game the South is playing yet." "A game," snarled the Great John. "They crowned a monster and call it law." Robb listened, jaw tight, hands clenched behind his back, the way his father used to stand when he wanted others to forget he was listening. He could feel every pair of eyes in the hall drifting toward him, measuring him, Ned Stark's son. The boy who rode too fast and laughed too easily, the boy who was not his father. They were waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to falter. Catelyn Stark watched her son from the side of the hall, her heart pulling painfully in two directions. She saw the boy she had once woken for lessons, hair uncombed, voice still soft with sleep. She also saw the weight pressing down on his shoulders now, the weight of the North, of a name too large for any one man. Robb's gaze flicked toward her just for a moment. There was fear there, carefully hidden, and something else besides. Determination, sharpened by grief. A rider entered the hall, boots muddy, cloak torn by hard miles. The murmurs died instantly. "My lords," the rider said, dropping to one knee, "from King's Landing." Robb stepped forward. "Speak." "Joffrey Baratheon has been crowned king. Lord Eddard Stark is accused of treason against the Iron Throne." The hall erupted. Steel scraped stone as men rose to their feet. Curses flew, thick and ugly. Catelyn felt the words strike her like blows. Treason, crowned king. She thought of Ned standing alone among vipers, doing what he had always done, trusting honor to protect him. Robb said nothing at first. The noise washed over him, but he heard only his father's voice in memory, steady and unyielding. "When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." He raised his hand. Slowly the hall fell silent. "They have named my father a traitor," Robb said. His voice was firm, though his chest burned. "They have crowned a boy who thinks cruelty is strength. The South has chosen its path." He paused. Every word now mattered. "We will not beg for justice from those who have none." Great John Umber grinned, fierce and satisfied, but Robb was not finished. "I am calling the banners." For a heartbeat, even the Gratian was silent. Catelyn closed her eyes. She knew this moment. This was the step from which there was no turning back. Robb continued, forcing himself not to think too far ahead. "Not of blood, not of death. Every sword sworn to House Stark will gather. We march not for glory, but for family, for honor, for the North." The words sounded right. They sounded strong, but inside fear clawed at him. He did not know how many men would answer. He did not know how long their stores would last once winter truly came. He did not know how many would die because of this choice. He only knew that doing nothing would be worse. As the lords knelt, one by one, Robb felt the weight settle fully at last. This was not a game, not a lesson. This was command. And command meant responsibility for every life he was about to send into danger. Catelyn watched him accept their oaths, and pride warred with dread in her chest. Robb feared becoming another Ned, honorable, just, and dead, but she feared something else entirely, that he would learn too quickly what it cost to be a king. Outside the walls of Winterfell, the wind howled low and cold, carrying with it the promise of snow. The North remembered its dead, it remembered its wrongs, and now, under a young wolf's banner, it was beginning to stir. Chapter 2. A Court of Thorns. Highgarden was in bloom, and everyone knew it. Roses climbed pale stone walls in careful excess, red and white petals spilling over balconies, arches, and courtyards, as if the castle itself were determined to remind every visitor where true beauty and true power resided. The air was thick with perfume and late summer warmth, bees drifting lazily between blossoms, servants moving like practiced dancers through shaded halls. Margaery Tyrell sat among lords and knights who spoke far too loudly. She smiled, because smiling was expected of her. She inclined her head, because it made men feel heard. She said little, because listening taught her more than speaking ever could. The pavilion had been raised at the heart of the gardens, silk banners fluttering gently, tables laden with fruit, wine, and fresh bread, so white it almost seemed wasteful. Around her, the Reach debated the future of the realm as though it were a matter of fashion rather than blood. Renly has the love of the people, declared Lord Rowan, lifting his goblet. Love wins wars as surely as steel. Love fades, replied Randyll Tarly sharply. Discipline does not. A ripple of uneasy laughter followed. Randyll Tarly never joked, and everyone present knew it. Margaery's eyes moved, not to the men who spoke, but to the men who did not. The ones who watched faces instead of banners. The ones who counted cups, refilled, and plates left untouched. Power, she had learned, rarely announced itself. Rosie's name passed easily from mouth to mouth. Rosie Baratheon, handsome and laughing, crowned in green and gold in half the songs already spreading through the Reach. Her husband, her king. At least, that was how it was supposed to be. Margaery let the word king settle in her mind and tested its weight. Rosie was kind to her. That was true. He enjoyed her company, her wit, her presence beside him like a carefully chosen jewel. But kindness did not hold castles. Smiles did not feed armies. And when the noise of the pavilion swelled, arguments over banners, over rightful heirs, over which oaths mattered and which could be broken, Margaery found herself wondering how much of this Renly truly heard. She reached for a fig and took a small bite, eyes lowered, listening. Always listening. Across the pavilion, her grandmother sat slightly apart, as if the chair itself had learned to give Olenna Tyrell space. The Queen of Thorns did not bother pretending to enjoy herself. She watched the gathering with sharp, bird-like attention, lips pursed, tapping her fingers against the armrest. Olenna had seen kings rise and fall before Margaery had ever learned her letters. She had learned early that men often mistook her age for softness. They rarely survived that mistake. When the debate reached its loudest, voices overlapping, tempers flaring, Olenna rose. The room quieted, not because she demanded it, but because everyone knew better than to ignore her. "My lords," Olenna said mildly, "you're all shouting, as if the Iron Throne were a prize plum hanging just out of reach. I assure you, it's more likely rotten at the core." A few men chuckled nervously. "Risier his charm," Olenna continued, waving a dismissive hand. Yes, we've all noticed he has banners too, and handsome ones at that. But banners don't win wars on their own, and charm has a dreadful habit of vanishing the moment blood touches the ground. Randyll Tarly scowled, but said nothing. Olenna's gaze swept the pavilion. What we should be asking is not who smiles best in armor, but who survives when the songs stop. She sat, conversation resuming, in quieter tones, more cautious now. Margaery met her grandmother's eyes across the space. Olenna's look was brief, sharp, and unmistakable. Later, when the lords finally dispersed, some to drink, some to argue elsewhere, some to whisper behind columns, Margaery joined Olenna in a shaded alcove overlooking the lower gardens. The sound of water trickling through carved channels filled the space, soothing, constant. "Well," Olenna asked, without preamble, "did you enjoy the performance?" "They're afraid," Margaery said calmly. "Not of Renly losing, of choosing wrong." Olenna snorted. "Fear is the most honest thing any of them brought today." Margaery folded her hands in her lap. "They speak of love and banners. None of them speak of winter." "Because winter is inconvenient," Olenna replied. "It doesn't care who your king is." They sat in silence for a moment, watching servants below distribute baskets of grain to waiting carts. Highgarden stores were immense, granaries packed deep, enough to feed half the realm if properly managed. Margaery followed the movement with interest. "Tell me," Olenna said at last, "what do you think of our young king?" Margaery chose her words carefully. "Renly inspires loyalty. He makes people want to follow him." "Want is not the same as endure," Olenna said. "No," Margaery agreed, "but it is a beginning." Olenna studied her granddaughter closely. "And the others?" Margaery inhaled softly. This was the true test. Not repeating what she had been taught, but proving she had learned. Joffrey is unstable, she said. Cruelty without restraint. He would burn the realm to feel powerful. Olenna nodded once. A boy playing at monsters. Stannis is dangerous, Margaery continued. Not because he is loved, but because he does not need to be. Men like that don't bend. And break everything instead, Olenna murmured. Margaery's gaze drifted northward, beyond the gardens, beyond the reach. Robb Stark is unknown. Olenna's eyebrows rose slightly. Unknown can be worse than cruel. He is young, Margaery said. But so was Renly once. So was Joffrey. The difference is what they were taught to value. And what do you think this one values? Olenna asked. Margaery hesitated. Honor, family, duty. Olenna grimaced. All terribly expensive virtues. Yes, Margaery said quietly. But also durable. Olenna was silent for a long moment. Then she leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. You're asking the wrong question. Margaery looked at her. Am I? You're asking which king deserves to rule, Olenna said. That's a luxury question. The real one is simpler. She leaned forward, voice low. Which king survives winter? The words settled between them like frost. Margaery felt a thrill, not fear, but recognition. Winter is coming, she said, quoting the Stark words, as if tasting them for the first time. And we are the ones who hold the food. Olenna smiled then, sharp and satisfied. There it is. You're learning. Below them, wagons rolled out from Highgarden's gates, heavy with grain, fruit, and preserved meats. Power, Margaery thought, was not forged in steel alone. It grew in fields. It filled bellies. It decided who lived long enough to kneel. She thought of crowns, of songs, of smiling kings in green and gold. Then she thought of snow, burying roads, of starving armies, of banners drooping in the cold. I don't want to be a queen who decorates a throne, Margaery said softly. I want to be a queen who matters. Olenna's gaze softened, just a fraction. Then you must be willing to see the world as it is, not as men sing it. Margaery smiled again, but this time there was calculation beneath the charm. A quiet resolve forming like a seed beneath the soil. Highgarden bloomed. The lords argued. Renly laughed somewhere in the distance, and far to the north a young wolf was calling his banners. Margaery Tyrell listened and began to plan. Chapter 3. The Lion's Arithmetic. The solar of the hand overlooked King's Landing, but Tywin Lannister did not look at the city. He stood at the long table instead, fingers resting on carved pieces of wood and stone arranged with deliberate precision. Gold lions marked hosts. Small towers marked strongholds. Thin lines carved into the table represented roads, rivers, supply routes. To Tywin, war was not chaos. It was accounting. Move the Westerlands levy here, he said calmly. The Riverlands will bleed first. They always do. A clerk obeyed at once, shifting the piece. Tywin did not raise his voice. He never needed to. The room bent to his certainty, the way lesser men bent to fear. Behind him, Tyrion Lannister leaned against a pillar, cup of wine in hand, eyes following the movement of the pieces. He drank, but not to dull himself. He drank because thinking this clearly made his head ache. You're assuming the Tyrells stay loyal, Tyrion said mildly. That's generous of you. Tywin's mouth tightened. The Tyrells need us. They need us now, Tyrion corrected. That's different. Tywin turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge the comment. Highgarden feeds half the realm. They will not gamble their abundance on an untested rebel in the north. Robb Stark has already beaten us twice, Tyrion said. Untested is no longer accurate. Tywin studied the board again. He moved a lion, then stopped. A boy winning a few battles does not make him a king, he said. Rebellions burn hot and die quickly. Some don't, Tyrion replied. Some are fed. That earned him a look, cold, sharp warning. Tywin's gaze dropped to a different piece. A lone lion separated from the rest. Jaime, the room felt smaller suddenly. The capture was unfortunate, Tywin said at last. Unfortunate. Tyrion almost laughed. Jaime Lannister, heir to Casterly Rock, taken alive by a northern boy king. If anyone else had said it, the word would have sounded absurd. Unfortunate implies chance, Tyrion said quietly. This was a disaster. Tywin did not correct him. Instead, he picked up the piece representing Jaime and turned it slowly between his fingers. A hostage, he said. Not a corpse. That's the only reason we're still breathing, Tyrion agreed. If Robb Stark were less honorable, we'd be lighting candles already. Tywin placed the piece down carefully, far from the rest. Isolated. Honor is a weakness, Tywin said. It will cost him. Or save him, Tyrion said. Depends who exploits it first. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken calculations. Tywin moved again, placing gold tokens along the roads. Our armies are spread thin, he said. Too many fronts, too many enemies pretending not to be enemies. Which brings us back to the Tyrells, Tyrion said. They're smiling, that worries me. They smile because they're winning, Tywin said. They always do. And if they decide we're no longer the winning side, Tywin's eyes flicked to Tyrion. Then we remind them what losing looks like. Tyrion drained his cup. Father, if we push too hard, we leave them no reason to stay. Tywin considered this, just briefly. He was not immune to good sense. He simply weighed it differently. But Reach will not side with the North, he said. They have no love for wolves. They have no love for lions either, Tyrion replied. They love harvests, stability, a future. Tywin turned back to the table, which we provide. For now, Tyrion said, another piece moved. Another calculation made. Robb Stark's victories will draw attention, Tywin admitted. But attention fades. Gold endures. Gold runs out, Tyrion said. Especially when you're paying for 5 wars at once. Tywin's jaw tightened. There it was. The truth beneath the arrogance. The Westerlands were rich, but not infinite. Armies consumed coin the way fire consumed air. We will crush the Riverlands, Tywin said. Break the North's momentum. The rest will fall in line. And Jaime? Tyrion asked softly. Tywin's hands stilled. For now, he said. Jaime lives. It was not reassurance. It was a promise to himself. Tyrion watched his father, this immovable force of will and tradition, and felt a flicker of something close to dread. Tywin Lannister was brilliant. Ruthless. Prepared. But even he could not bend numbers forever. Men were dying, gold was draining, allies were watching, and somewhere in the north, a young king was learning faster than expected. The lion still ruled the board, but the game was no longer as simple as it once had been. Chapter 4. The King in the Field. Dawn came pale and cold over the Riverlands, mist clinging low to the grass like breath held too long. Robb Stark stood on a rise overlooking the ford, his cloak damp at the edges, his sword heavy at his hip. Below him, men moved quietly. More shadows than soldiers following orders given in whispers rather than shouts. Where Robb was learning was mostly waiting. They think we're here, said a voice behind him. Great John Umber loomed like a bear, wrapped in mail. His beard beaded with moisture, his eyes sharp despite the early hour. He followed Robb's gaze toward the ford, where Lannister banners fluttered confidently on the far bank. They do, Robb replied. That's why we won't be. Greatjon grunted. Risky. Yes, Robb said. But they've grown used to us doing what they expect. The plan had been Robb's, argued over and questioned until even his own patience had worn thin. Split the host. Feign weakness. Draw the enemy forward while the real blow fell elsewhere. It went against every instinct of the older lords, men who had fought beside Ned Stark and believed battles were won by strength shown plainly. And Robb had stood before them and insisted. Now came the moment when insistence turned into proof. A horn sounded from the far side of the ford. Lannister men began advancing, armored feet splashing into shallow water, banners lifting higher as if already tasting victory. Robb raised his hand. Far to the west, unseen from the ford. Another horn answered. Low, sharp, deadly. The trap closed. When the fighting began, it was not glorious. It was mud and shouting and the wet sound of steel finding flesh. Robb rode hard along the flank, issuing orders, adjusting lines, sending reserves where they were needed, and pulling them back before they broke. He did not lose himself to the sword the way he once imagined he would. He watched, he calculated, he endured. By the time the Lannister commander realized what had happened, it was too late. Their forces, split and overextended, buckled inward. Men fled. Others dropped weapons and begged. The ford ran red. When the horns finally fell silent, Robb reined in his horse and looked over the field. Bodies lay scattered like discarded armor. Banners trampled into the mud. Victory, he realized, looked nothing like the songs. Greatjon rode up beside him, breathing hard, blood on his axe. Well, he said after a moment, then barked a rough laugh. I'll be damned. Robb did not smile. His hands were shaking, though he kept them steady on the reins. The lords gathered later, in a makeshift council, amid tents and wounded men. The mood was changed now, quieter, sharper. They looked at Robb differently. Not as a boy, not even as Ned Stark's son. As a king, one lord, gray-haired and stubborn, questioned an order Robb had given during the battle. An order that had pulled his men back at the cost of pride, but saved their lives. "You had no right," the man said, voice tight with anger. "I've led men since before you could lift a sword." Robb met his gaze. "And if I hadn't ordered it, they'd be dead." Silence followed. Robb felt it then, the weight of command pressing down harder than armor ever could. To lead meant to offend, to decide who bled and who lived. He nodded once. "You're dismissed," he said. The man left, stiff-backed and furious. Afterward, when the camp had settled and fires burned low, Greatjon Umber approached Robb again. This time, he dismounted. Without ceremony, the Greatjon went to one knee. Robb stared at him, startled. "You don't have to." "I know," Greatjon said, voice rough. "That's why I'm doing it." He bowed his head. "Not for your father, for you." Robb swallowed. The exhilaration of victory surged through him, and beneath it the cold understanding that each step forward took him further from the boy he had been. As night fell, ravens took wing, carrying word of the battle south and east. The name Robb Stark followed them, whispered now with something new attached to it. Not just wolf, king, and alone beneath the stars, Robb wondered how much of himself he would have to give before the war was done. Chapter 5. The Shadow of the Seven. The Red Keep had never been quiet, but lately the noise had changed. Cersei Lannister felt it even when she was alone. Footsteps echoed too loudly in the corridors. Doors seemed to close a fraction slower than before. Whispers lingered, unfinished, as if the walls themselves were listening. She stood before a tall window overlooking the city, fingers resting against the cool stone, watching smoke coil upward from Flea Bottom. The city smelled of sweat and river rot and something sour beneath it all, fear perhaps, or hunger. King's Landing was restless, and restless things broke. "They were watching me," she said softly. Behind her, Petyr Baelish reclined in a chair, as if the room belonged to him, boot crossed over knee, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Everyone is always watching someone. Your Grace. The trick is making sure they're looking in the wrong direction." Cersei turned sharply. "I am not imagining this. I would never suggest you were," Littlefinger replied. "Only that imagination is a useful thing, especially in others." A servant entered, head bowed, parchment trembling in his hands. Cersei took it, dismissing the man with a flick of her wrist. She read quickly, then again slower this time. Her jaw tightened. "He refuses," she said. Littlefinger's eyes sharpened with interest. "Refuses what, precisely?" "To confess properly," Cersei snapped. "He'll admit to vague treason, to mistakes made in the king's service, but not to plotting against Joffrey, not to naming himself guilty of what we need him guilty of." Ned Stark, even imprisoned, even beaten, he clung to truth like a shield. It infuriated her. "Honor is such an inconvenient habit," Littlefinger said lightly. Cersei paced now, the hem of her gown whispering across the floor. "If we spare him, I look weak. If we execute him, I make a martyr." "Martyrs are dangerous," Littlefinger agreed. "But so are living symbols." She stopped and stared at him. "You're enjoying this?" "I enjoy possibilities," he corrected. "And Lord Stark presents several." Cersei thought of the prophecy again, unbidden. Gold shall be their crowns, and gold their shrouds. She had spent years convincing herself it was nonsense, the bitter ramblings of a witch. Yet every threat felt sharper now, every choice heavier. "What would you do?" she asked. Littlefinger rose and approached the window, standing beside her, gazing down at the city as if it were a board laid out for play. "I would delay." "Delay?" she repeated. "Keep him alive," he said. "Let his son march south, burning banners and coin. Let the realm fracture. The more kings rise, the weaker they all become." Cersei considered this. Ned Stark alive was leverage. Dead, he was a story. Stories traveled faster than armies. "And if Robb Stark refuses to bend?" she asked. Littlefinger smiled thinly. "Then we apply pressure elsewhere." "Saints, Cersei said at once. "Yes," he said, pleased. "Sweet, gentle Sansa. A replacement lever if Lord Stark breaks." The word replacement sat easily between them. Cersei's gaze drifted back toward the city. Below, a cluster of robed figures moved through the streets, drawing a crowd behind them, barefoot men. Septons with raised voices. The faith had grown louder of late, sermons swelling with promises of purity and justice. "They're becoming bold," Cersei said. "The faith. They're becoming useful," Littlefinger replied. "The poor listen to anyone who feeds them hope." or bread. Cersei watched as more people gathered around the septons, drawn in by fervor and hunger alike. They preach obedience, she said, and righteousness. They preach certainty, Littlefinger said. In uncertain times, that's intoxicating. Her fingers curled into the stone. They could become a problem. Only if you try to stop them, he said. Let them gather, let them shout, while they rage at sinners and shadows. No one looks too closely at the throne. Cersei turned this over in her mind. Chaos as camouflage. Faith as distraction. Very well, she said at last. We tolerate them for now. Littlefinger inclined his head. Wise. And Stark, she asked. Keep him breathing, Littlefinger said. Just long enough for his son to bleed. Cersei exhaled slowly. Ned Stark's life had become a countdown. Each day measured not in mercy or justice, but in advantage. She felt no pity, only calculation. Leave me, she said. Littlefinger bowed and slipped away, already planning his next whisper. Alone again, Cersei returned to the window. The city churned below her, faithful and furious, hungry and hopeful. Somewhere in a cell beneath her feet, Ned Stark waited, still believing truth mattered. She smiled thinly. Let him wait! In King's Landing, truth was only another weapon, and she had many hands ready to wield it. Chapter 6. Envoys in a hostile world. The camp of Rensley Baratheon spread across the green hills like a festival that had forgotten its purpose. Catelyn Stark saw it before she heard it. Silk banners snapping brightly in the wind, armor polished to a mirror sheen, laughter drifting freely between tents. There were flowers woven into spear hafts and ribbons tied to reins. It was beautiful. That, she decided at once, was the danger. She rode forward beneath a banner of truce, Brienne of Tarth at her side, the clink of mail beneath Brienne's blue cloak, the only sound that felt honest. Catelyn had traveled through burned villages and empty fields to reach this place. The contrast made her stomach tighten. This is not a war camp, Catelyn said quietly. Brienne glanced around, her broad face unreadable. No, my lady. It's a court, pretending to be one. They were received politely, too politely. Smiles came easily here, and words flowed like wine. Rhaenyra's men escorted them through rows of tents where knights sparred for sport and minstrels practiced songs meant to be remembered later. Everything about the camp spoke of confidence, of certainty that victory was already assured. Rosier le Baratheon awaited them beneath a green and gold pavilion, lounging comfortably as if kingship were a role he had been born rehearsing. He rose when Catelyn approached, his smile warm, effortless. Lady Stark, he said, you've traveled far. Farther than I wished, Catelyn replied, dipping her head. But necessity has its own roads. Risley laughed lightly. Doesn't it always? They spoke of courtesies, of weather and roads and the state of the realm. Rensley was gracious, charming, dismissive in a way that almost hid the blade beneath it. Your son has spirit, he said at last, waving a hand as if brushing away a fly. But the North has always been distant from the heart of things. Catelyn felt the insult land and refused to let it show. The heart still needs blood, she said calmly, and the North bleeds as readily as any land. Rosierne's smile never faltered, but his eyes sharpened. Robb Stark is young, so was Robert, Catelyn replied. That earned her a pause, a flicker of something thoughtful. From the edge of the pavilion, Brienne watched silently. She saw what others missed, the way Rensley leaned back when speaking of Robb, but leaned forward when Catelyn mentioned the North's loyalty. Brienne felt an unease she could not name. Men who laughed this easily often mistook confidence for strength. Beyond the pavilion, Catelyn's attention was drawn to another figure, a young woman walking among the tents, her presence drawing eyes without demanding them. MARGAERY TYRELL moved with practiced ease, her smile soft, her words gentle, her gaze attentive. She listened more than she spoke. That one is dangerous, Catelyn thought at once. Later, as Rensley dismissed them with polite assurances and empty promises, Catelyn found her eyes drawn again to MARGAERY. The girl met her gaze across the distance and inclined her head just slightly, not submission. Acknowledgement, steel beneath silk. Brienne noticed it too. She watches everything, Brienne said quietly as they were led away. And everyone, yes, Catelyn said, including us. That evening, Rensley sent for Catelyn privately. The tone was different without an audience. The laughter faded. The charm dimmed just enough. You should tell your son, Rensley said, pouring wine, that I admire his courage. Truly, But this war will not be won by courage alone. No, Catelyn agreed. It will be won by those who understand what comes after. Rensley studied her. And what do you think comes after? Winter, Catelyn said simply. Razuli did not answer at once. Brian stood near the door, silent as a sentinel, watching the exchange with growing clarity. She saw it then. Roxley dismissed Robb publicly because it pleased his court, but privately he listened because he could not afford not to. He needed legitimacy as much as banners, and the North distant, stubborn, loyal offered something no southern lord could manufacture. Outside, Margaery waited among the roses, her face calm, her thoughts unreadable. She had not spoken to Catelyn Stark, but she had seen her clearly enough. A king in the North. A mother who would not bend easily. Possibility. As Catelyn left the camp that night, suspicion heavy in her chest, she understood one thing with unsettling clarity. Swords would decide much in the coming war. The choices made in quiet tents by people who smiled too easily might decide more. Behind her, the camp of Renly Baratheon glowed with torchlight and confidence. Ahead lay uncertainty, cold roads, and a son who was learning how enemies smiled before they struck. Chapter 7. What the South Eats. The North Lacks. Past scene. Margaery Tyrell had always known that food was beautiful. She watched servants carry baskets through the lower courtyards of Highgarden, their arms laden with apples polished to a shine, loaves of bread still warm from the ovens, wheels of cheese wrapped carefully in linen. The scent of it all drifted upward, yeast and fruit and herbs, familiar, comforting, abundant. Abundance was the Reach's true sigil, more powerful than any rose stitched on silk. She stood on the balcony overlooking the granaries, listening as stewards spoke below, their voices blending into a steady murmur of numbers and roots and yields. Margaery had learned long ago to listen when men thought a woman's attention harmless. The North will freeze, one steward said plainly. Not this year, perhaps, but when winter deepens, and they have little stored, another replied. Their land is wide, but the harvests are thin. They've always relied on endurance. Endurance, Margaery thought, did not fill bellies. She leaned on the stone railing, eyes following the wagon train as it rolled out through the gates, bound for the Southlands. So much food, so much certainty. Here, hunger was an inconvenience, not a sentence. Later, she walked through the gardens with her grandmother, the sun slanting low and warm, petals falling around them like careless gifts. They talk of war as if it's a tournament, Olenna said, snipping a rose with sharp finality. No one mentions winter. Because winter frightens them, Margaery said, and because they think it will come for someone else. Olenna glanced at her. And what do you think? Margaery hesitated. She had been thinking of the North, of long roads buried in snow, of fields that yielded little even in good years, of a young king fighting not just enemies but seasons. I think, she said slowly, that swords win battles, but bread decides who is still alive to fight the next one. Ilonja's mouth curved slightly. Now that is a useful thought. That night, Margaery sat alone with maps spread before her, candlelight dancing over rivers and roads. She traced the distance from Highgarden to Winterfell with her finger. So far, so cold, and yet the line felt inevitable. Robb Stark, a name she knew only from reports and rumor. A boy king, they said. Honorable. Dangerous. Starving. She imagined the North without southern grain and felt a strange tightening in her chest. Not pity, exactly, but recognition. This was what real power looked like. Not crowns. Not vows. Survival. What the South eats, the North lacks. The thought unsettled her. Marriage had always been a ladder, each rung carefully chosen. Rendia had been an obvious step. Popular, smiling, safe. But safe did not mean lasting. And Winter did not care for popularity. She closed her eyes and allowed herself, just for a moment, to wonder what it would mean to rule beside a king who needed her realm. Not for luxury, but for life itself. A king who would not see her as decoration, but as necessity. Ambition stirred in her, familiar and sharp. Yet beneath it, something else took root. Curiosity and a sense of purpose she had not expected. By the time the candle burned low, Margaery Tyrell understood something the others did not. Winter was coming for everyone, and the Reach would decide who survived it. Chapter 8. The Price of Crowns. The War Council had broken apart, but the tension remained, lingering in the tent like smoke after a fire. Grub Stark stood over the map table, hands braced against the wood, eyes fixed on the western coast. Pins marked armies and roads, victories won and dangers yet unmet. The sea remained bare. Theoden Greyjoy watched him from across the table, arms folded, expression caught somewhere between impatience and familiarity. He had stood at Robb's side since boyhood, laughed with him, bled with him, dreamed with him. That was the problem. You were leaving half the board empty, Theon said at last, and the half with the ships. Robb did not look up. I haven't forgotten the sea. You're pretending it doesn't matter, Theon replied. Balon Greyjoy has a fleet, a real one. If he sails for you, the Lancers choke. Supplies cut. Coasts burned. War ends faster. Robb exhaled slowly. And if he sails against me, the Theon snorted. He won't. Robb finally met his eyes. Your father rose in rebellion once already, and lost, the Theon said sharply. Because he stood alone. This is different, is it? Robb asked. He thought of the stories his father had told. Ironborn raiders burning villages, the price the North had paid to put Balon Greyjoy down. Some wounds did not heal cleanly. Theon leaned forward, palms on the table. I know my father. He respects strength. You've shown it. Victories travel faster than ravens. So do grudges, Robb said. Silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither wanted to name. They had grown up together, shared blades and bruises, sworn brotherhoods in snow and blood, but crowns changed the weight of words. Kings could not afford friendships the way boys could. You don't trust me, Theon said quietly. Robb's jaw tightened. That's not... It is? Jan cut in. You trust me to fight, to bleed, to die if you ask it, but not to speak to my own father. Robb looked back at the map at the coastline that refused to move. He needed ships. He needed speed. He needed something the North did not have. I trust you, he said at last. That's why this is difficult. The Angwyan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny thing to say before you refuse. Robb straightened. I haven't refused. The words hung there, dangerous. If I send you, Robb continued slowly, I risk opening a door I might not be able to close. The Ironborn don't answer to banners or oaths. They take what they want. They take what they're allowed to take, Theon said. Give them a reason to stand with you, and they will. Robb thought of winter again, of supply lines stretching thin, of battles yet to come. He thought of his father, who had trusted men until it killed him. And he thought of the weight of command, pressing him toward decisions that felt less like choices and more like debts coming due. I don't have the luxury of caution, Robb said quietly. Not anymore. Theon's eyes lit with something fierce and eager. Then send me. Robb hesitated just long enough for doubt to cut deep. Then he nodded. I'll send you to Pike, he said. You'll speak for me. You'll offer alliance. Ships. Pressure on the western coast. Theon grinned, relief and pride mixing dangerously. I won't fail you. Robb wanted to believe that. Gods help him, he did. As Theon turned to leave, Robb called after him. Remember who you are. Theon paused at the tent flap. I know exactly who I am, he said, and stepped out into the night. Robb returned to the map, staring at the coastline once more. Trust, he thought, was the price of crowns. And sometimes it was paid in things no king could afford to lose. Chapter 9. Old powers stir. Varys had learned long ago that true danger rarely announced itself. It arrived as whispers, as pauses in conversation, as fear that could not quite explain itself. He stood alone in a narrow passage of the Red Keep, a place servants used when they wished not to be seen. A brazier burned low nearby, more for light than warmth. The air felt wrong tonight, too still, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. The wall, Varys said softly to the darkness, always the wall. The man kneeling before him was no lord, no knight, just a courier, thin from hard riding, eyes darting as though something followed him even here. They say the cold walks, the man whispered. Not like snow, like intent. Varys smiled gently, the way one smiled at frightened children. People say many things when nights grow longer. Yes, the courier agreed too quickly, but they don't usually desert in silence, or leave posts manned by no one living. That made Varys still. When did these whispers begin? He asked. After the first battles, the man said. After the realm started tearing itself apart. Of course, Varys thought. The world always noticed the abyss, only after stepping too close to it. He dismissed the courier with a purse heavier than truth required, then remained alone, staring into the faint flame. Kings rose and fell by his careful nudges. Alliances formed and shattered. All of it manageable. This was not Far to the east, across black water and broken stone, fire burned brighter. Dragonstone was a bleak place, all sharp angles and older memories, and Melisandre of Ashai welcomed both. She stood before a tall brazier in a chamber carved from the island's heart, her shadow writhing along the walls as the flames leapt higher. She had seen this night before. Not the stone, not the fire. The feeling. The flames lie, she murmured, but they do not forget. Shapes moved within the fire, crowns forming and melting, swords breaking, cities drowning beneath snow. She leaned closer, breath steady, eyes unblinking. There are too many kings, she said to the fire. Too many false lights. Behind her, boots echoed softly. Stannis Baratheon entered without ceremony, his presence cutting through the heat like iron through flesh. You said the fire would speak, he said. It has, Melisandre replied. You are not alone in your claim, but you are alone in your purpose. Stannis studied the flames with open distrust. I see only fire. You see what you are willing to see, she said. I see what comes when crowns distract men from darkness. She straightened, turning to face him fully. Something old stirs beyond the wall. Not an army, a force. Stannis' mouth hardened. Then it will be destroyed. Yes, Melisandre said softly. But not by all kings. Only by the one who understands sacrifice. The wind howled outside, battering Dragonstone's walls. Stannis felt the weight of duty settle deeper, heavier, inevitable. He had never believed the world kind. If it demanded fire to be saved, then fire it would have. Back in King's Landing, Varys extinguished the brazier with careful fingers. So many games, he whispered to himself, and the board grows colder. The old powers were not shouting. They did not need to. They were waking. Chapter 10, Rosies and Wolves. The gardens of Highgarden were quiet in the late afternoon, the heat softened by drifting clouds and the constant whisper of leaves. Margaery Tyrell walked slowly along the gravel path, her pace unhurried, her expression composed. To anyone watching, she was simply enjoying the calm after days of counsels and conversation. In truth, she was thinking carefully about what had not been said. Olenna Tyrell sat beneath a shaded arbor, pruning shears in hand, cutting away dead petals with ruthless precision. She did not look up as Margaery approached. They're more frightened than before, Olenna said. That's not anything new. Of the war, Margaery asked, seating herself nearby. Of choosing the wrong side, Olenna replied. Margaery folded her hands in her lap. They still speak as if the North is a problem that will solve itself. Olenna snorted. The South has been saying that for centuries. The North endures. That's what they never learn. She set the shears aside and finally looked at her granddaughter. Tell me something. Purely hypothetical. Margaery lifted an eyebrow. Purely? What if? Olenna said lightly, the North had allies. The question hung in the air, deceptively simple. Margaery did not answer at once. She thought of grain stores and snowbound roads, of banners raised in defiance and kings crowned too easily, of a young wolf fighting battles he had not chosen. It would change the war, she said at last. It would change everything, Olenna corrected. Food travels farther than swords. Loyalty bought with survival lasts longer than loyalty bought with gold. Margaery's gaze drifted toward the distant hills, green and abundant. The North has pride, she said. They wouldn't beg. No, Olenna agreed. Which makes them interesting. There was no talk of marriage alliances, no vows imagined, only possibilities laid carefully on the table, examined without touching. Margaery felt the familiar pull of ambition, but it was quieter now, tempered by something steadier. Purpose, perhaps. Far away, in a tent pitched on colder ground, Robb Stark stood over a map lit by a single lantern. The Riverlands lay scarred beneath his eyes, marked by pins and charcoal lines. Victories and losses alike weighed on him now, each report another reminder that war did not pause for youth or doubt. A messenger waited nearby, cloak still dusted from hard riding. The Reach is restless, the man said. They smile in public, but there's talk, discontent, with the Lannisters. Complaints about gold, about arrogance. Robb nodded slowly. He had learned to listen for what lay beneath words. And Highgarden, the messenger hesitated. They're watching. Robb dismissed him and remained where he was, staring at the map. The Reach, fields that never seemed to end. Granaries deep enough to feed kingdoms, power that did not shout. He thought of his father again, of honor and its costs, of trust given too freely, and of the price he was already paying for it. Allies were necessary, dangerous, essential. He did not reach for the quill. Not yet. In Highgarden, Olenna rose and placed a single rose on a table where maps were spread for the next council. Its petals were pale gold, its stem long and thorned. She set it deliberately at the edge of the parchment, just beside the inked outline of the north. MARGAERY watched, understanding without a word spoken. In the Riverlands, Robb Stark straightened and looked northward, then south, measuring distances that could not be crossed by armies alone. No promises had been made, no oaths sworn. But plans, once imagined, had a way of demanding to be fulfilled. The rose lay beside the wolf, and the world, balanced on the edge of choice, waited to see which way it would fall.
Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.